to another episode of King Jing Things. I am King Jing. He is Mike Barnett. And today we are bringing you a recap of the 2025 NFL Draft. We'll end up covering some of the prospects that we think will end up being steals in the draft, as well as some guys who we thought were a bit of a reach. But before we get into all of that, Mike, how we doing today?
Jimbo, I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Excited to talk some football. We've talked about football all weekend, but it's nice to really recap and dive into some of the things we've been discussing for other people to see. But also, that being over, now we can just look forward to the schedule dropping in May, and then it feels like in no time football will be so back. So, thankful day for me.
For sure. I've definitely already hopped on Madden, updated all of the rosters and stuff, and I'm in the middle of the first season with all of the Falcons' new draft picks. So, I'm sure I'm going to end up winning the Super Bowl there, and that can only mean great things for the Falcons. That means they're making a run at the Super Bowl this year. There were definitely some twists that we didn't see coming in this draft for sure. Specifically with the Cleveland Browns, they had the second overall pick in the draft, and both of us were pretty certain that it was a lock that they were going to stay in that position, and they were probably going to draft Travis Hunter in that spot, who is obviously being touted as a generational prospect at this point in time. But they did decide to trade back with the Jaguars. They moved to 5. Jaguars end up taking Hunter, and the Browns end up taking a future first round pick next year, and also moving back to the 5th position where they were able to snag Mason Graham, a defensive tackle out of Michigan. So that was a bit of a surprising move to me, but I guess the more surprising news regarding the Browns is that they ended up snagging Shadur Sanders in the 5th round after a lot of the media ended up stating that, he'd probably end up being a first rounder. And that obviously led to a giant 3-day slide. I think this is probably going to go down as the most watched draft overall. Because, a lot of people will tune in, or most people will tune in for the first round. You might have a couple guys stick around and they'll watch the second day of the draft. And then that third day, that's more of where the sickos come in. You have to be a real sicko to see who the Giants are snagging in the 6th round. You have to be a real ball knower. But what do you think about the whole Shadur Sanders situation?
I was shocked. I mean, in our hot takes video, I projected 4 QBs to go in the first round just based on how it's worked out in the past. And I know everybody was talking about how weak this draft class is for QBs, but that never has really seemed to matter year over year. So the fact that only 2 were taken in the first round was shocking enough. The fact that Shadur Sanders dropped to the 5th round was also still very shocking. I think as we were going through the process and learning more about the pre-draft process and some of the things that he went through, it seems that teams weren't willing to bring on uh, realistically extra anything that would have come with Shadur Sanders. Now, we don't know anything specifically about what happened in any interviews, anything like that. There's been tons of speculation, but realistically, like you have to have had put a foot wrong for Dylan Gabriel got drafted in the 3rd round and Shadur Sanders dropped to 5. And sure, they both went to Cleveland, but I didn't see anybody having Dylan Gabriel going that high, or I have still not seen anybody say they think Dylan Gabriel has an opportunity to be a starting quarterback in the league. Um, it's anything's possible. We all know that. We've seen plenty of draft picks get taken really late and suddenly be great, or vice versa. But I think realistically, you know, it got to a point where I started to feel bad for him because I do think he's a talented young man. He's not, maybe he wasn't first round material, but he's definitely 5th round material. He might have been 3rd round material. We can definitely talk about that a little more. But I just got to a point where I was feeling bad for him, but I also feel like I understand where the teams are coming from. I don't know that I would want Deion Sanders breathing down my back at any point. There's just always so much weird talk that comes from him, and I don't think he was any help to his son in this draft process. That's not to say Shadur didn't maybe hurt himself, but I think Dion didn't help either because I love the confidence he has in his son. I love how cocky he can be sometimes, but I just don't think that resonates well with teams anymore. You know, And I think even if you think about like the Ball brothers, for example, like they all got taken early and they kind of went through that. I think people saw that and some people saw that negatively. And I think in the NFL, with the fact that Dion could come in and coach your team, which maybe I don't think he could be an NFL coach, but there are people that think he could. That's the last person I want talking badly about me and thinking an owner might make a decision to get rid of me to bring Dion in. I think that's a real possibility of thoughts that people went through. And realistically, it was kind of sad to watch.
For sure. I definitely don't think it was the on-field stuff that we were seeing. You sort of mentioned it. A lot of this was like speculation at the most. Obviously, we have some clips that are going viral of, Dion coming out and saying, "Yeah, my sons will not play for certain organizations. I'll say it, we'll make sure that doesn't happen." And, that doesn't just rub those teams the wrong way. I feel like it's going to rub most teams the wrong way, where you're going to have this outside force that is sort of trying to dictate your son's career or players on your roster's career when they don't necessarily have a voice in that locker room, in that organization. But when you are somebody such as Deion Sanders, where you have such a good relationship with all of these different media personalities just because of his past. Obviously, a lot of people our age and even older than us looked up to Deion Sanders when he was still in the league. So there's this perception of Deion where he's sort of, bigger than life itself. He's got a big personality, and that comes with a lot of critiques for your organization. And I think we mentioned it a little bit on the last pod, but we sort of forecasted that if Travis Hunter went number 2 overall to the Browns, we might see, I think we said, or maybe it was just me, that the Browns would trade back up into the first round and snag Shadur there. And I think we said, if one thing starts going wrong, maybe whether it's the Browns not wanting to put Shadur in as the starter, or maybe Shadur is just not doing well as the starter, there's going to be some voices in the media that start questioning, hey, when is Dion going to end up being brought in, whether it's a quarterback coach, whether it's an offensive coordinator, or even a head coach of the team. And you just don't want the media dictating your team versus the organization itself. You did mention, Dylan Gabriel being snagged in the third round. That was a certain certainly a reach in my eyes. I don't think anybody had him going that high in the draft. Granted, the public's big boards have always proven to be looked at differently than how organizations' big boards are. But the fact that Dylan Gabriel went in the third round and Shadur ended up going in the fifth, like there is no way that was real, and again, I feel like we're all speculating what caused Shadur Sanders to slide that far in the fifth round or down to the fifth round. Um, but it's certainly not stuff that you're seeing on the field. He's got a talented arm. He's got good accuracy. He's got a better build for a quarterback than Dylan Gabriel. So it doesn't really, give like a good reason to why maybe Gabriel was chosen in front of him. You rarely see two QBs taken in a draft. So I do feel like, two QBs going to the same team in a draft. So I do kind of think that the owner of the Browns, Jimmy Haslam, ended up coming in and sort of forcing the GM to make that Shadur Sanders pick, because even like you'll see the war room, the Browns war room after they ended up announcing that Shadur was the pick. Like you look at Kevin Stefanski, you look at the GM Andrew Berry's face, and they both just have blank expressions. They're sitting there and clapping and stuff, but you see anybody, like you can take somebody in the seventh round. If you feel like you've got an absolute steal on your roster, everybody in that war room is going off, but they were just sitting there clapping, sitting down. So it was definitely giving someone has a gun to my back, and I needed to make this sort of pick. But that being said, I do think Shadur Sanders will end up having a chance of being the starter next year, which is sort of crazy to say. I was listening to Pardon My Take a little bit earlier today, and Big Cat, I feel like hit the nail on the head with it. He said that Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett will probably have like a little battle for who's going to be the initial starter for the team, and whoever doesn't win will end up getting traded. Because right now they've got five QBs in that room, and I think we both figure that Deshaun Watson will not be taking a snap for the Cleveland Browns, maybe ever again. But like he's still a part of that QB room. So, Flacco and Pickett will end up going for who's going to be the initial starter, and then they're going to have a different QB battle between Shadur and Dylan Gabriel on who's going to end up being the QB2 that they sort of put their focus on in developing as a QB. And right now, DraftKings has the best odds, or has the odds for who's going to be the starter for the Browns on the first game. Right now, Kenny Pickett's at plus 120. He's got the best odds. But right after that is Shadur Sanders at plus 225. So it seems like Vegas also seems to think that Shadur has a very good chance at ending up as the starter for the Browns, whether it's at the beginning of the season or whether it's, down the road. But I'm glad to see that he got drafted. Obviously, people can say what they want about the guy. You might not necessarily agree whether what he's doing is cockiness versus confidence. But the guy can play football. We've seen it before. He didn't have the best college career, but the fact that you have multiple QBs taken over him, I feel like was absurd. I feel like the lowest that you can go is like him being your QB4 in terms of the QB prospects going into this draft.
I mean, Mel Kiper was about to cry on TV all weekend about how far he was dropping. I mean, I don't know if I felt that strongly about Shadur Sanders dropping that low. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to see that, but I think we've all talked about the QBs in the draft in general. We don't know if any of them are going to be able to start. I mean, Cam Ward's probably going to start day one. He was the number one pick in the draft, but is he even that good? I don't know. But what I have said for years, and I think the Browns did it, is like if you think there are multiple quarterbacks in the draft, in a draft like this where you can get them between the third and fifth rounds, take anybody that you want. If a team took five quarterbacks in the draft, everybody would be like, wow, that's weird. But damn it, you gave yourself five chances, like to see what they do. Like, yeah, it would be really weird coming into the season. Your preseason would be super odd. But I've always kind of wanted to see that because now you're giving your, whether anybody likes it or not, the most important position on the football field is quarterback. Everybody knows it. And if your quarterback isn't performing, your team's not going to perform. I mean, that's why the Chiefs are so successful, why the Eagles are doing so well. Jalen Hurts has been a great pick for them, and he does everything that they need him to do on the field. Josh Allen is fantastic for the Bills. Like, and the teams that quarterback struggle, they just don't make it to the Super Bowl. So, like, for me, the Browns were smart. If they think Gabriel has something that nobody else saw, make the pick. Sanders is still there in the fifth round, make the pick. And let's see what the two guys do. And if one of them works out, exactly. You just get rid of the other one. Give him to somebody else and let him get a chance. And maybe he fits a different system better than he fits yours. But realistically, I feel bad for both of them because quarterbacks go to Cleveland to die. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, somebody has to win that battle over there. I'll definitely be curious to see which one of them ends up succeeding. Uh, but who knows? Like either of them could end up being a decent steal for the Browns. And with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and lead us into who sort of we thought were the biggest steals of the draft. I asked that both of us come in here with three different names. We didn't discuss beforehand what our guys were. So I think this will be interesting. But Mike, why don't you go ahead and give me who you think is going to be one of the biggest steals of this entire draft?
The first biggest steal, and I said this in my in our hot takes video, but it's Josh Simmons going 32 to the Chiefs. I still think he was the best offensive tackle on the board. He's the most proven offensive tackle on the board when he's playing. I know he's coming off injury, but I think he gave up one sack his entire college career. He's just a proven guy, knows how to play the game, and him going to the Chiefs. only accelerates that for him going to protect Patrick Mahomes, which the Chiefs needed more than anything. They struggled the most last year protecting Patrick Mahomes. They really needed to put somebody on their offensive line that could protect him immediately. And as soon as he comes back from injury, all of the medical reports have come back saying they look really good. He's not fully healthy yet, but like he's recovering as well as anybody with the same injury. I think he could end up being the best player out of the entire draft, all in all, after his career ends.
It's definitely possible, especially with how the QB situation played out in terms of how most people evaluated the talent there. This is sort of anybody's draft that they can come up and end up being the face of it, I guess. And what a better spot for him to land than the Kansas City Chiefs. Like you are probably the most talented offensive lineman in this entire draft. You obviously fall just due to that injury concern, and you know what? I think what was it, a patella tendon that he ended up injuring, so it cut his last year pretty short for the Buckeyes. But you know, you go to the best organization possible for your development. You know, you have that chip on your shoulder for falling that far. You now get to protect the best QB in the entire league, maybe historically the best QB of all time. I think we're going to see a lot of great stuff from Simmons going forward here.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I'm curious who your first value steal would have been.
For sure. I'm going like number three, then number two, then number one. So for my third best steal in the entire draft, I'm going to be a little bit of a homer here, and I'm going to go Xavier Watts, the safety out of Notre Dame, who the Falcons ended up snagging in the third round. I understand why he fell because he's sort of got like a smaller frame. He's 6 foot, 205 pounds, and he ran a 4.6 40. So in terms of like athleticism, he's a pretty average athlete. But if you look at the raw numbers, the man is an absolute playmaker. This is a guy who caught 13 interceptions over his last 2 seasons with Notre Dame. He had 27 pass deflections, and you as the Falcons just got probably one of the most productive defensive players in this draft, and you got him at 96. So when that guy kind of falls into your lap, you do that every single day. I will still say that I think Malachi Starks is a better safety prospect than him. But that's a first round draft pick versus a third round draft pick. So I absolutely love that for the Falcons.
I agree with you. I think it was a great pick for them. Uh, he realistically was probably the second best safety for me in the draft. Um, the only thing that made me feel kind of odd is they went safety literally the next pick. The Falcons did, so that was kind of odd. But again, it actually goes back to my quarterback point where it's like if you need to fill a position and you feel like there is more than one guy on your board that could do it, go figure out which one is best and move on from the other one quickly. So I can't wait to see what Watts does. It's going to be great to see. And I think, getting to play with Jesse Bates, even if it is for just 1 year, since his contract will be done at the end of this next season, you're going to get a lot of tips and tricks and really learn from somebody that's been arguably, funny enough, the best fantasy safety for the last 5 years. If you ever played any kind of defense, he is the best fantasy safety by far, and he's been fantastic for the Falcons since he came from the Bengals. So looking forward to see what happens there.
For sure. Well, what do you have as your number two steal of the draft?
My number two steal of the draft is the sixth round pick, number 179 for the Miami Dolphins, Ollie Gordon. Uh, he would have been a first round draft pick running back if he came out of college last year. It was not close. He was the best running back in the league in college football the year before. He came back to what I would argue is a pretty bad team, so his production went down immensely. But I really don't know that that had much to do about what this kid can bring to the table. And with HN having injury history, I don't think Ollie Gordon comes in and takes his spot by any means, but I think this gives you a really good second back to come in. He's 6'2", he's a big guy. This is what we're going to need to be able to pound the rock on third down. So HN's the guy, right? He's so speedy, he can do anything back in the backfield. put Ollie Gordon as the two back now that Mostert's gone as well. I think that the Dolphins have picked somebody that realistically is more talented than where they were picked. He is one of the best values in the draft by far, and I cannot wait to see what he's able to do in that backfield.
I agree. It's sort of crazy to think about it because he did had a, he had a phenomenal season in 2023, and then, he just didn't meet those expectations that he was sort of given coming into this past season. But in 2023, he ran for over 1,700 yards. He averaged 6 yards per attempt, and like that's what you want in the NFL. Again, I don't think he ends up beating out Achan. Achan is sort of that guy who you can like use in so many different ways, where I believe Ollie Gordon is just your straight like, ground and pound guy. But I think that's a good dynamic to have in your backfield for sure. So I definitely think that's one of the better picks
Yeah, I think
of the
Ollie
draft.
Gordon legitimately was astrodanty in 2023. Again, the production went down immensely in 2024, and that's completely fine. But if they can find the right ways to use him, the Dolphins have always wanted to use a duo back system. They want more than one guy playing, especially because with HN's injuries specifically, we need to make sure we have another guy back in that backfield doing that. So I'm really excited to see where that goes.
For my second pick, I ended up taking Jahad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama, who was drafted by the Eagles. You know, we obviously went to the Falcons draft party, and I think we stayed there until what was it, the 21st pick, to see if Shadur would end up getting taken by the Steelers.
Yep.
So this happened, while I was driving back home. But when I got home and I looked on Twitter, everybody was just clamoring about how Howie Roseman has done it again. And this is a guy that we saw being mocked as high as 15 to the Falcons, leading up to the draft. I believe he had a shoulder injury or a rumored shoulder injury that ended up causing this little drop off in the first round. But I don't think that necessarily paints like the entire picture of what you're seeing. The dude has athleticism off the charts. He's very versatile, and the dude is going to succeed in the NFL for such a long time. And I expect him to come in as a day one starter as long as that shoulder injury doesn't affect him and like, require surgery. But it's crazy that Howie Roseman continues to sort of use that same mantra when drafting defense, which is don't move up, just sit where you are, and eventually one of the best SEC defensive players will end up dropping into your lap. And that's exactly what happens this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive, to be honest with you. I saw a lot of people upset that the Falcons traded up, took James Pierce Jr. and didn't take Jahad Campbell. Um, and I think realistically, it's all what you value, man. It's hard to choose. Nobody knows the truth behind what's going on. For as lucky as Howie Roseman seems to be, there's 30 teams that passed up on him, and you wonder why, right? Jahad was just going to fit so well in that SEC defense because that's basically what the Eagles are at this point. He's probably going to know all the guys that he's playing with. I'm sure he's played against them. And let's not act like these kids in college aren't communicating with each other and understand. Probably went to all the same camps growing up before they went to these colleges. They know everybody and what's going on. So he's an immediate locker room fit. And I think that's just another huge step for the Eagles right there. He's a great pick. Curious to see what he's able to do, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about this injury if it's even something that matters. And um, we're going to find that out as soon as the season starts.
For sure. Why don't you go ahead and round us out? Who was the biggest steal of the draft for you?
For me, and I actually changed my mind multiple times on who this would be as the days went on. But it actually ended up being Luther Burden third going to the Bears at 39. Uh, I just, if you go back and watch his tape, in 2023, he had a better season, but last year was marred with just terrible quarterback play. And the guy was still making some fantastic plays when the ball came his way. And if there was anything that the Bears needed to do in this draft, in my opinion, they needed to do anything they could to get Caleb Williams more weapons. I know, they had Keenan Allen last year, they have DJ Moore, they have Rome Odunze, but they needed more. And reason, well, Keenan Allen, of course, is no longer there. But you're not going to put a weapon in front of a guy like Caleb Williams and it's not going to be helpful to your team. I mean, the same with like they took Loveland at 10. And that was just such a good pick to me because I think he was a better pass blocker than Tyler Warren personally, which also gave them a chance to have the pass block and have somebody that can catch the ball. So you're now talking about two guys that Caleb Williams is going to have immediate impact on the football field, and he is the most important guy on their team. I don't think they could have had a better pick at 39, seeing him left on the board. If he was off the board, I think they would have went maybe offensive line or defense. But when they saw him there, they were salivating.
They definitely got a solid 1-2 punch with the first two picks of the draft with like you said, Colston Loveland, and then following it up with Luther Burden. You mentioned he didn't necessarily meet the same standards as he set in the previous season. But you know, the dude can still come out here and he makes a strong case for being the best receiver in the class. I think we still have Tet McMillan above him. I think we still have Emeka in front of him. But just in terms of like the tools needed to succeed in the NFL, Luther Burden has that written all over him. And you know, the Bears continue to do the right thing, which is get solid weapons put around your quarterback, your very young quarterback that you drafted first overall. And you know, I think this only does, you know, positive things with, you know, his sort of stature while he's out there, his confidence in himself, and obviously his team. So you're making the right moves if you're the Bears.
Couldn't agree more. And that's all you really need to do. Like, whether nobody gets a bad grade if you come out of the draft and you got your quarterback players. You can go back any year and look at it, and your people will always be happy if you got your quarterback what they needed to succeed. So they're in a really good place.
I'll go ahead and round us off here. I had Shadur Sanders as the biggest steal in the draft, and I could be seen as crazy for this, you know, but we sort of touched up on it before we started recording. Shadur as your first round pick, you're probably going to be left with more to desire. You know, if you pick Shadur in the second round, you're like, okay, you know, I guess he was projected to be a first round pick, but I'm still not happy about it. Third, fourth round, you're like, okay, like this is solid. And then in the fifth round, you're like, okay, this is an absolute steal. You know, there's hundreds of reasons seemingly to why Shadur Sanders ended up dropping in this draft, but we're not going to dive into that. We already did that at the top of this pod. So that being said, the guy has an arm. He's got like a quarterback or NFL quarterback level arm. He's got accuracy. He can, you know, still throw the ball while he's on the run. And I feel like with a coach like Kevin Stefanski, he can sort of make the most out of what Shadur is bringing to the table here. And, you know, there's a world where Shadur ends up taking this slide that he experienced, having a chip on his shoulder, and it's going to motivate him for the rest of his career. And it's very possible because now he's looking at 31 other teams, 32 if you're counting the multiple draft picks that the Browns had before him, saying, y'all passed up on me, and I'm going to tell you why. You know, so obviously, you know, he had a lot of question marks coming into the draft as a potential pick or as a potential top pick. But now that he's a fifth rounder, those expectations sort of go away, and there's no downside of taking him with your fifth pick. You know,
Yeah, I think he probably would have been high as a steal for me. The only reason I think I'm hesitant is because they took Dylan Gabriel, which means they valued something out of Dylan Gabriel more than they did Shadur Sanders. And they took him 2 rounds before. So I just question in my head, like, what did they value Shadur Sanders at? Obviously, we're talking about the off field stuff, but I think if they still valued him as a high pick, they would have taken him in the 3rd round regardless of the noise. So to take a guy like Dylan Gabriel, who I'm sure was, you can only imagine Dylan Gabriel was perfect in interviews, well spoken, unbelievable at his craft when it comes to expressing what he's been through. And you know, he's from Hawaii and they're just beautiful people. Like, I'm sure he won a lot of hearts over in that organization from that standpoint. But the kid also is a winner. He's won plenty of football games. And even though like they lost to Ohio State in the playoff last year, like after they went down a ton, he still tried to will that team back, and there's something to that. So, you know, say what you want. We talk about it all the time. Like we think about all the players that get in trouble for stuff, but then still get to play and we just ignore it because they play really good at football. There's something that the Browns noticed and that most of the NFL noticed that made them feel like they couldn't take him as a quarterback. That has to something do with his play as well that we don't know. I hope he proves us wrong for his sake as a young man that's trying to be successful, but I'm really curious to see what that turns into in the next 6 months when we're watching him play football.
For sure. It's definitely a question mark, and I feel like I'm going out on a limb with him being the biggest steal because there's definitely a chance where, the Browns end up seeing something during this off season, during camps and stuff, and he might not even be on the roster. There's a very real chance of that happening. I'm more looking at, just putting the two quarterbacks next to each other. Dylan Gabriel is a smaller guy. He's 5'11". You don't see a lot of small quarterbacks really succeed in the NFL. So I'm sort of taking that and riding with it. I think Shadur can end up proving himself as a better QB than Dylan Gabriel at the professional level. But yeah, we'll definitely see what happens. That's definitely a decision that the Browns are going to have to make because I don't see both of them being on the roster going into the first game of the season.
Yeah, I think on the other end of the spectrum, like Dylan Gabriel to me kind of has that Russell Wilson-esque like playability that like worked so well in Seattle. The problem is we're talking about two guys that aren't going to succeed anyway because the Browns organization is a dumpster fire. My dog just fell off the bed. That's hilarious. But since they're such a dumpster fire, like it really doesn't matter what these two guys do. So I feel terrible saying that, but it is true. I mean, how many quarterbacks have they had since 2000? Let's not even count.
Exactly. We'll go ahead and transition over to our biggest reaches of the draft. This one, I feel like I had a little bit more of a struggle with finding who I thought would be here. There's one that I feel where it was like the clear cut number one guy, but everything else it was kind of just your own expectations. And granted, uh, draft grades don't really matter because you're not really comparing it to concrete stuff. It's sort of you see all of these websites posting their draft grades, and it's like that draft grade is only reflective on what you who wrote the article believes in. It's not a consensus thing that you're looking at. It's just whether they sort of line up with how you valued these people in the draft. So I think it was 2012 where the Seahawks ended up drafting Russell Wilson. They ended up drafting Bruce Irvin. They ended up drafting a bunch of people from the Legion of Boom, and it was almost consensusly people saying, "Oh yeah, that's an F, that's a D. That was a terrible draft pack and draft class." And like, look how that ended up turning out for him. So draft grades don't really mean shit. But that being said, who was your biggest or your third biggest reach in this draft?
Mine was Trevor Etienne going in the fourth round to the Panthers at 111. Right between 105 and 111, a bunch of running backs started to go. Scatabo was first, and I think they just saw a running back that they maybe found some value and just picked him to go. But there are a lot of other things that I think were much more needed for a team like them than to go with a running back, especially when they just signed Rico Dowdell to be with Chuba Hubbard. So I don't really understand why they picked that. They could have waited till the fifth round and picked somebody else that I think would have been just as good as a guy that missed half of the season, transferred from Florida to Georgia, really didn't make that much of an impact at all. Um, Obviously, his brother is in the league, and he's kind of been a disappointment too, to be honest with you, since he's been in the league in Jacksonville. So I'm just a little bit. I don't really understand the fit, why they felt like going in the fourth round there when they have so many glaring needs that they could have added to or at least given a try. But I think it was just one of those like they saw running backs going off the board, they found value in him and said we need to use the pick here so we don't lose him. But it made no sense to me.
I think the run and running backs ended up causing that draft pick because teams end up scrambling at that point in time. I do think he brings something to the table that the other two guys that you mentioned don't, which is just being an absolute like power back just going right up the seam. So I feel like Carolina reached on him simply so that they can use him in like short yardage situations. But you did hit the nail on the head. He was basically non-existent in the Georgia offense as a Bulldogs fan. He definitely left more to be desired. I thought when he was coming in, we were getting an absolute dog, and he definitely missed the mark on that. But I can see where Carolina might, just because of the run on all of the running backs being drafted, they sort of felt like they were forced into this situation and snagging him early here. Uh, and I think teams in general end up doing that just due to, stuff that is happening within the draft itself, where they start to panic, or with, certain retirements from other players, which sort of leads me to my third biggest reach. It was Tyler Booker going, I think it was 12th overall out of Alabama to the Cowboys. You have Zach Martin retiring last month in March, which obviously left a huge hole in the Cowboys' offensive line. So he was not one of the higher ranked prospects on most mock drafts, on most big boards in general. Um, and this guy, like, he's solid. I like what he can bring to the table, but I think you're drafting mainly based off of projection. And he's not a high floor guy. He's more of a high ceiling guy. But I read on, I think it was PFF, but he is one of the most unathletic picks that were taken in the first round. He doesn't react very quickly. He's very slow, and I just don't see him, projecting as a multi-facet sort of lineman. I feel like he's good with pass protection. So, I mean, if you are only throwing the ball, then I guess, he can probably find success there. But if you start changing your scheme around, like that's when he's going to really get thrown off of his game. That being said, he only gave up 2 sacks in 2 years of starting at Alabama. So I could very much be wrong about all of this, but I did not see a lot of people having him in the first round. I think a lot of people there were expecting the Cowboys to either take Tet McMillan or Ashton Genty. Obviously, neither of those guys fell to them. So I guess their backup plan was just to scramble and try to find one of the better offensive linemen in this draft.
I just genuinely think the Cowboys would have took Tet McMillan if he dropped to them, but the minute he was gone, it that was their only player. I think from a wide receiver standpoint, they had as high as 12. But I think the reason I don't find it to be a terrible pick is, you know, you're looking at it from, well, they're just trying to fix a glaring need, but it's a glaring need they needed to fix right now because Dak Prescott got hurt last year. They paid him so much money. He didn't even play as well as we know to seen him have played in the past. If that was something that they felt was going to immediately help Dak Prescott be better, you have to make that pick 100 times out of 100 times. And I think what it was is like we're just looking at all the tackles in the draft, and we have so many strong, talented tackles, but we weren't talking about guards almost at all. He was really the only one that had any first round consideration. So I saw some people were saying like they could have not taken him at 12, maybe traded back in and got him. But then you're wasting other picks of other things that they had some glaring needs within their team, especially on defense, where I don't really understand that mindset either. So if you're not getting your number one guy, which I think was Tet McMillan, and a lot of people were projecting that, and Jeanty's not dropping to 12, and that's really kind of where you felt like your offense was going to need somebody, because CeeDee Lamb and Tet McMillan would have been a sick duo. I think you have to go with your most glaring need, and that was guard. So if he is as unathletic as they say, I don't see many. I mean, it's so hard to judge an offensive lineman as athletic
Right.
when you're in the interior, especially. Tackles are a little bit different because they have to move. Guard, you don't really know as much, and that's where he's going to play. So I'm just really curious to see what he's able to do. But, I know they worked him out specifically and felt really good about it from what I was seeing. So I don't think it's a bad pick, but I can see why people felt like he was taken too high. But if you felt like he was the only guard in the draft worth taking and could start tomorrow, then you have to make the pick.
Yeah, I definitely think that's why they ended up taking him for sure. It was a glaring need that you needed to fill almost immediately, and like your number one goal as the Cowboys is probably to protect your multi-million dollar quarterback. Though there were some slight rumors that they might be trying to trade him this offseason. I don't think that went anywhere, but there was definitely some rumblings of it on Twitter. But yeah, this could very well blow up in my face. There are obviously not a lot of options for them to choose. At that point, you're choosing positional need versus, best player available. So you can go back and forth on which way is the better way to draft, but it was definitely something that they needed. Well, why don't you go ahead and give us your number two biggest reach in the draft?
My number two biggest reach, and just for the fact that I can't believe this kid got drafted, is Chamir DK. From the Florida Gators, he went to the Tennessee Titans at 103 in the fourth round. I'm a Florida State fan. I've watched him play against Florida State multiple times. I think this kid sucks at football. And I feel terrible saying that as a person because he's worked his ass off to get where he is. He's done way more than me on a football field, but he had 17 drops in his career and 11 touchdowns. If you have more drops in your career than you do touchdowns, and realistically, don't I he the wide receivers there kind of blow in Florida in the first place. There are so many other guys in that draft that could have went over him, and the fact that the Titans picked him just kind of shocks me. I think about guys like Xavier Restrepo, who people said he had a lot of terror. Like his 40 time was really bad at the combine. They said he didn't feel like he was very fast, and that was a really big knock on him. So he didn't get drafted at all. But that kid was the Miami defense or the Miami offense last year, coming from Cam Ward. I just don't see why you wouldn't take a kid like him to team up with Cam Ward when you know they already have that chemistry to give Cam Ward your first round number one pick, somebody that he's comfortable with right away. Uh, so yeah, I just don't understand that pick. Don't think that kid should have been drafted. Just my opinion.
I do think the Titans ended up snagging him as an undrafted free agent, so I think that connection is still going to be there in Tennessee. But I definitely get the sentiment. I don't know too much about this guy, so I can't really speak a lot about him. But that being said, I think they were again just addressing a need out there of wide receivers. You have Calvin Ridley, who is definitely like a hit or miss prospect. They got Buddy, who they drafted in the first round a couple years back, who hasn't, really performed that well. I think this guy is just, he brings speed to Tennessee's offense. He's going to be a vertical threat for Cam Ward. You're hoping to just, air it out to him. And there's probably not a world where he is going to be your number two wide receiver, you know. So I think this is more of just trying to take a swing on somebody who brings like absolute demon speed to your team. But in terms of where they got him, I definitely saw him being mocked more for like the fifth, sixth round, and you got him in the fourth round. So you can definitely consider that a reach.
Yeah, I just don't see it for him. I mean, the kid dropped some easy passes. I've seen it. It's just it reminds me of like Robbie Anderson. Remember when the Jets took him, Chosen Anderson, Robbie Chose, whatever his name is today. He was going to be the guy, and he was a speed demon, but they couldn't even get him the ball, and that's what I have a hard time knowing if Cam Ward's going to be able to do that immediately. Um, with the guy he has no chemistry with, so we'll see. But yeah, he was my second worst. So who's yours?
I also got a wide receiver that was picked in the no, actually he was picked in the third round. But it was Pat Bryant out of Illinois. He was drafted by the Broncos, and I will start this off by saying the Broncos obviously needed more receiving depth. So this is another case where we are seeing a team fill a need, not necessarily going after the best player available. My problem was that there are other prospects that were still left on the board that I think had higher upside than Pat Bryant, and they ended up going after him instead. So, we mentioned it up at the top. Obviously, our mock drafts and our big boards, as the general public, are going to be a lot different than, the big boards of an actual team because I feel like they have a lot more information that the public doesn't know. Uh, But that being said, I didn't see any big boards that had Bryant as a top 100 guy in this draft. And here we have the Broncos picking him at 74th overall. And this is another guy who has a history of dropping a lot of passes. This is a guy who gets swallowed up in man coverage whenever he's going up against NFL level talent. And again, everybody like this isn't just some shit prospect. You know, he's obviously got some positives. Like he's a bigger bodied guy. It looks like he's 6'3", 200 pounds. But again, when you're drafting these guys, I feel like you're looking for athletes, you know. And you know, he's not very athletic. He's decent at blocking, you know, but are you really going to want your wide receiver blocking like a ton? I don't think you draft a guy based off that skills. So like he can go up and get contested catches, you know, just because he's a bigger guy, but that skill doesn't really lead to long successful careers in the NFL. Again, it kind of just looks like they're going after getting a guy who fills a need. And it just left more to be desired. You know, I think there were better prospects around him that could have been picked, especially at the wide receiver spot.
I think this was Sean Payton kind of living on a prayer. Before the draft process, he said that he thought Pat Bryant would have been the next Michael Thomas. They were very similar players. And he was so excited. I watched a video yesterday of Sean Payton talking about them picking RJ Harvey at 60 and how, like, they knew that was their guy. And as soon as they knew that, they told everybody in the organization to shut up. Do not talk about him because that's the guy that they're going to get with their second round pick, and he's not going to be talked about. It seems like he's kind of doing the same with Pat Bryant. Because I was a little shocked. Like, you don't really see coaches very often say or give comparisons to somebody unless they're playing like the mind game. And this was probably the best draft for mind games that we've seen because people were doing all kinds of things that, whether you agree or disagree, was changing the way that the draft was from all the way from day one through day three. And as you talked about, like, only the sickos are watching in day three, but day three was affected as soon as day one started, which was just kind of crazy. So, yeah, I mean, realistically, I think he's going off a guy that he sees potential for. Doesn't mean he's going to be the right guy by any means, but I think the Broncos draft really ended when they got Harvey because they were just reading about them talking about him yesterday. He was the draft pick that was going to make their draft. They got him at 60. Then I think they were just playing with house money. So yeah, I'm not high on Bryant either, but let's see if he proves us wrong. Um, I mean, I'm glad he went over Shamir DK. So that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're not sitting here wishing on these kids like downfalls in the NFL. So
Yep.
by selecting them as reaches, we're not rooting against him. Except I think there's one guy that we are both rooting against in any potential success in the NFL, and I think we both have him down here as our biggest reach.
I
So
hope
go
so.
ahead.
Because if you don't, I'm going to be upset if you pick somebody else,
Who
honestly.
who who do you have here?
The biggest reach in the entire draft by far was Tyler Shaw, whatever his name is. Nobody knows his name because he shouldn't have been drafted maybe at all. Like what the Saints were thinking or what they see that I none of us see, I don't really know. A guy that's been hampered with injuries through his whole career, so I'm sure that's something they were like, we're not going to knock him for that. Transfers to three different schools. He's been maybe average at every single one. He played at Louisville last year. Wasn't that great. I don't really know what people see in him. I guess he has the build of what they expect quarterbacks to be. And we see it every year, right? Like, oh, this guy's going to be fantastic because look at what he looks like. Look at what he's 6'5". He does this. And then all of these guys come out and suck. Daniel Jones, great example, sucks. Like this guy, I've seen him do nothing. Like I have such a hard time assuming that somebody's going to come into the league that's never been an established winner, and just suddenly bringing a team to winning and a bad team at that. We like the Falcons, obviously. I'm also a Dolphins and Bears fan, so if anybody ever asks in the future, you heard it here first. I don't want the Saints to succeed, and when they took that pick, I think we celebrated more than the Saints fans did. Like I don't know what they see in him. Again, if he comes out and proves us wrong and I have to bite my tongue and say it like, hey, you ended up being great, sorry for doubting you, fine. But I don't really know anybody just that watches college football that one even knew who he was before the draft process and two thinks he was better than some of the other guys in the draft. Like I know Kyle McCord ended up going later in the 6th round, but I just think he was a better quarterback. Like I would have rather seen him go there. Or obviously Shador Sanders. Like what a dumb pick, in my opinion.
Will Howard went after him. Y'all ended up picking up Quinn Ewers in like the 7th round. Like, I think this guy is definitely not in my top six, top seven off of the top of my head. And especially with the viral clip of him going and just absolutely missing his receiver by a large margin. I feel like that should have just tanked his entire draft stock in general. You said it. He's got NFL size. He's got an NFL arm, but you're also taking a chance on a 26-year-old rookie. I think he's 25 right now, but when the season starts, he'll be 26. You mentioned it. He went to three different schools. He was with Oregon, he was with Texas Tech, and then he had his last year at Louisville. He entered the college recruiting class with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And Justin Fields is almost on his way out of the league. Now we got this guy who's just now trying to make a name for himself in the league. I went ahead and did a little bit of a breakdown of what he looked like over his very long college career, but he backed up Justin Herbert while he was at Oregon. He was eventually beat out as the starter by Anthony Brown. You know where Anthony Brown is right now? He is the backup for the Houston Roughnecks in the UFL. So that guy beat him out for Oregon. He then transfers to Texas Tech, where he battled like four guys for the starter spot. He ended up winning it, but then later that year in week 4, he breaks his collarbone. The next year, he goes on, he wins the starter position, he wins the starter job, but he gets a shoulder injury that sidelines him for a few weeks. Then in the following week, still the starter, he breaks his fibula. So he needed surgery. He's ruled out for the season. He then transfers to Louisville and he led his team to a mad record of 8-4, and he ends that season with the 14th most yards out of any QB in the league that year and the 22nd most passing touchdowns. So what here is absolutely screaming to the Saints, this guy is starting caliber in the NFL, which obviously the Saints need. They have so many different holes that they could have filled here. They decided to reach on a quarterback who probably would have been there in the third, probably would have been there in the fourth, probably would have been there in the fifth. And you have Derek Carr seemingly not even wanting to play for the Saints in this upcoming season. So I see why they needed to pick a quarterback. It's just I think you picked the wrong guy.
I agree with you. I just, it's all speculation. The entire draft is speculation, but like, I know who he lost to. He lost to Clemson, uh, Notre Dame, SMU, who almost won the ACC. Like, I get that the teams that they lost to were very good realistically throughout the season, but I also don't think he had any games where he just completely showed out. I think he threw for two 300-yard games, which in college is pretty good. It's not to say that he can't be a good quarterback. It's just how can the experts, per se, not that I'm an expert, all feel the same way until like 2 weeks before the draft? To me, it's like these guys are on payroll and they want them to start talking about them to get this team to suddenly make a stupid pick so they can go get somebody else that they want. Because it's all a big game. That's really what it is. And we're just watching it play out and we find it very interesting, and it is very interesting. But I. What are they going to do? Sit him behind, what's the kid that came from South Carolina that is the Saints quarterback or played? Yeah,
Rattler.
Steve Rattler, yeah. What's he going to go back up Rattler for the first couple games? Like, or is he going to start over Rattler? Rattler sucks, right? So maybe he starts over him. So he's just got there's no direction there. The Saints aren't good anyway. Quarterback is not going to fix their team. I almost would have rather him just punt the next season and like wait to get a quarterback next draft. But they'll probably have a pick to be able to get one anyway. So I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I think that's maybe what they are banking on. There's a real chance that they just tank this entire next season, and they end up just going for what should be a very deep quarterback class next year. I don't know why you would believe that anybody on your roster right now is the quarterback of the future, but hey, we both could definitely be wrong here.
Before
uh
we get into the next thing, though, the last thing I'll say is this is Kellen Moore's chance to prove that he is the quarterback offensive coordinator whisperer. If he can make Tyler Shaw, whatever his name is, a great quarterback and make the Saints a good football team this year, then good on him and good on the patience that he's put together to get to where he is, because I would be in awe of what he's been able to do if he can do it.
for sure. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But before we go, I just wanted to go ahead and get both of our thoughts on who we thought had the best overall draft. So if you were going to give anybody the gold medal at the end of this draft, who would you say walked away improving their team the best?
I told you I was between two before we started. Then I thought I made a decision. Now I've taken a step back and think I've made a different decision again. And I'm actually going to go with the New York Giants. I think the Giants had the best draft because they got the best defensive player in the draft, not even close. Everybody knows he was a top three pick in Abdul Carter. That's the best pick in the NFL draft, in my opinion. Um, he was the guy that if you were going to get a player, that's who you wanted. Then they trade back into the first round, arguably for pretty cheap compared to some of the other teams that traded back in. I think they only traded two third rounders next year to get back into the first round. And of course, yeah, so for a second round and then those two third rounders for next year. So to get who they think is their franchise quarterback, which to me is a great choice. And then they take guys like Darius Alexander, Cam Scatterbo, Marcus Mbao from Purdue. They got arguably somebody at every position that they've had a need for. Now, it's the draft. If every single player worked out, we would be in shock. That's probably not going to happen. But I think they addressed everything that they needed to do in the first round, and then everything else was a bonus. Uh, I was looking back, and because my other team I was going to pick was the Bears, and I still think they had one of the best drafts. And I know a lot of people had them in like the middle of the pack. But again, I just think if you're putting your quarterback in a position to succeed, you're doing it right. I think the Giants did that as well by getting Scatterbo in their backfield to do whatever he's going to do. He's going to be a feisty little shit. I love it. And then you get Malik Neighbors, a guy that's going to throw the ball to him that you have to think is going to be good enough, or at least hope. Because if the Giants do suck again, they're in the same boat as the Saints, where they can just hopefully draft again next year, and there's going to be a much better class. So we'll see what happens. But I think the Giants did everything right, especially just getting Carter in the draft alone.
Yeah, I would give the Giants an A for their draft. I like what they did as well. You mentioned they are filling the roles and the holes in their roster that were needed to be filled, and I feel like that is the best thing that you can do while trying to take the best players available. And, if they believe that Jackson Dart is their guy and they went and got that guy, obviously Joe Judge, I think the old head coach for the Giants, he ended up going to Ole Miss afterwards. And I know he's still got a good relationship with some of the guys within the Giants organization. So, if he's feeding them good information about this kid, then, it makes all the sense in the world to go up and grab that guy. Because I do know that the Saints also liked him. So I think there are multiple teams going after Jackson Dart. So it's not like you could have just waited for him and fell to your lap in the second round. So I would say that's definitely one of the better drafts. I also was between a couple of teams. I decided to go. If you were to ask me, I think the Falcons had the best draft, but I think I'm being extremely biased in that situation. I love what they, left with, as well as all of the undrafted free agents that they ended up signing. I think if you culminate all of that together, we had the best weekend. Besides, obviously, the shit that's coming out with Jax and the whole prank calling, saga, but I will try to be a little bit unbiased here, and I'm actually going to go with a division rival, the Carolina Panthers. I think they were another team that just had a bunch of holes on their roster, and they went out and they tried to fill those holes. It starts out in the first round. They get Ted McMillan, who was your guy, who you could see being one of the best prospects coming out of this draft in general. So you're obviously building around Bryce Young, getting him a big time target. I think that's the best thing that you can do for a young quarterback, especially one that hasn't really seen the success that we were thinking of that we might see over the past couple years. He had a solid second half of the year last year, so I think they're basing it off of that, and we're just going to see what happened. They followed that up with drafting two edge players. Nick Scarton, who I saw at least like in the middle of the college season, maybe at the beginning, he was going in the first round. So I think they absolutely snagged somebody with a lot of upside and versatility to play in their defense, and they also got the edge rusher Princely out of Ole Miss. So I think it's always smart to try to grab some of these guys who are coming out of big time schools. They're obviously playing in the SEC. They're going up against a lot of NFL ready prospects throughout their entire tenure in college. So I think those were two very good deals because I was talking to my brother about it. They got Princely in the at the 77th pick in the third round. That was somebody that my brother could see going at the very end of the first round. Obviously everybody evaluates talent a little bit differently, but if you're looking at that, that was a solid pickup there. We mentioned that they drafted Trevor Etienne. He's not going to come in and try to be a starter, though I do think he has the upside to maybe do that. But they needed a power back to bring in, and they've got that. And they just had a solid draft there on out. I think they got Shadur's guy, yep, Jimmy Horn, another wide receiver in the sixth round there. They got Lathan Ransom out of Ohio State. You're going to take those guys from the powerhouse schools, and then you got tight end Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame, who it seems like he's dominated defenders throughout his entire tenure in college as well. So I was between, if I wasn't picking the Falcons, I was between the Panthers and the Cardinals, but I think the Cardinals just have a little bit more of a range on how it could go. Because I think they had Walter Nolan fall to them at 16, and they also had Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, fall to them in the second round. And both of those guys, they have, I think, low floors and very high ceilings. So if both of those picks hit, then the Cardinals go ahead and turn their entire organization around. It's just whether or not they are going to live up to the hype that they can. If the Cardinals can fully pull all of the talent out of these guys.
Yeah, I think the Panthers are kind of in the same boat as that, though. I mean, it's just they're just such a piss poor run organization. So I think you're 100% right in the aspect that you go and get Bryce Young, somebody you need immediately, and Ted McMillan is that guy. He can just throw the ball up to him, and he's gonna make it happen. He's gonna Mike Evans it. That's what we talked about in our hot take video. That's the best guy you can get for your quarterback. You have a successful draft every single time you build around your quarterback, and that's exactly what they did. As I said, like one of my worst value picks was Trevor Etienne, so like it would be hard for me to pick the Panthers at the top because I just don't. I mean, with all of the needs that they had, I could just see them using that on almost anybody else personally, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, the rest of the draft was really strong. Getting Jimmy Horn in the sixth, like he's one of those guys that could come later and you'd be like, he made Shadur look that much better with Travis Hunter, right? So like, yeah, all in all, I don't really know that any team had a terrible draft, which is not normal realistically. I mean, I think the lowest I saw was some C's from a lot of the experts, but I really enjoyed this draft more than most, and I think it's because it was so up in the air compared to what you normally see. I'm glad it worked out the way that it did.
For sure. And obviously, like if you're watching this, you've got to be very niche to be watching what we're talking about in terms of the draft. If you're watching us, you've probably also read other mock drafts, other mock trade or not trades, but grades that these different media sites have given these teams. And again, at the end of the day, It's sort of just going like you are giving a grade based on what you think of these players. It doesn't mean that just because you get an A grade means that you're going to have a great team at the end of it. It's purely based off of your own opinion, you know. So, you know, there's a very good chance that both of the teams that we picked here end up being absolute shit. Some of the steals that they got, they could just be duds. Some of the reaches, they could end up being difference makers in these teams' futures. But let us know what you think about the draft, what we had to say. Comment who you think had the best draft out of anybody, and you know, like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.